Mutation sucks. You can be born with jello-like skin or born with a beak, or you can have the abilities of Storm, Cyclops, and Wolverine. We overall call these people mutants. We watch them fight, fall in love, die, and come back for the past 60 years. But have you ever stopped and asked yourself where they come from? Not narratively speaking, like yes, we know they come from X-Men #1 back in 1963, but I mean ask yourself in universe why some humans are born with the X gene when others are not. Why did the mutant gene sit so quietly for millions of years and then suddenly explode across the population in the 20th century? In 1963, Stan Lee wanted to create a new team book, but he was tired of creating fantastical origin stories. At this point in his career, he already invented the Fantastic Four using cosmic rays, the Hulk using gamma radiation, and Spider-Man using a radioactive spider bite. Every origin needed a hero and every hero needed an accident. Stan didn't want to write another accident, so he pitched the idea to Jack Kirby that sounded almost lazy on paper. What if powers were their origin? And what if some humans are just simply born different?
Well, my biggest problem was, how did they get these superpowers? I had already run out of people being bitten by radioactive spiders and being subjected to gamma rays and cosmic rays, and I took the cowardly way out. I said, I'm just going to say they're mutants. We all know there are mutations in nature, so these people, they were just born that way, and then I don't have to come up with far-fetched explanations.
That idea became mutants, and the X gene was a scientific label slapped onto it later to make it feel less like a shortcut and more biology. For a while, early stories leaned on vague talk of nuclear radiation in the atmosphere since the Cold War made that idea feel current and scary. But over the decades, the mutant metaphor grew into something much bigger than a convenient plot device, and Marvel needed an origin worthy of what mutants had later become at this point. Being a story about prejudice, found family, what it means to be born hated for something you could never choose. On a cosmic scale, mutation had been planned early on. Roughly 1 million years ago, a group of godlike beings called the Celestials arrived on Earth. Celestials are closer to cosmic gardeners, entities so far beyond human comprehension that comparing them to gods almost undersells it. But during their visit, known across the Marvel lore as the first host, the Celestials didn't just observe early humans, they began experimenting on them out of divine curiosity. A Celestial named Gamenon the Gatherer selected a tribe of primitive humans and handed them off to other Celestials, Zarn the Tester and Oneg the Provator, who altered their genetic code directly. This single act splintered humanity's ancestors into 3 branches. One branch became the Eternals, near immortal beings built to protect the world. Another became the Deviants, an unstable and often monstrous offshoot that became the Eternals' rivals. In the third branch, the Celestials planted that would later become the X gene, or the X Factor gene, directly into the DNA of ordinary early humans, and then it was simply left there. So if the gene had been sitting in human DNA for over 1 million years, why did mutants only start showing up in noticeable numbers in the 20th century? Marvel has offered a few overlapping answers over the decades that reflects how differently the gene can behave from person to person. One popular theory ties to the sudden surge of humanity's growing capacity for large-scale destruction, particularly the dawn of the nuclear age. The idea being that as a species grows closer to the ability to wipe itself out, the X gene activates as some kind of evolutionary response, nature's way of producing the next stage of humanity's right as the current one becomes dangerous to itself. Other stories point to a catastrophic event such as Scarlet Witch's reality-altering No More Mutant spell or its later reversal, various cosmic snaps, and even the actions of individual mutants throughout history have all shown to have some influence when and how the gene expresses itself on a mass scale. And then there's the more quieter theory that mutants have always been here, hiding, isolated, and afraid for the entirety of human history. They only started to become more noticeable and more visible once Charles Xavier built the school and gave them a reason to stop hiding. Under that reading, this sudden explosion of mutants have never really been sudden. Society just wasn't paying attention until it became a problem. Let's clear up some misconceptions, because not every superpowered person with a weird ability in Marvel Comics is technically a mutant, and even among mutants themselves, the X gene doesn't play as a single rulebook. First, you have what's called a primary mutation. This is a classic version that most people picture. A person born completely human looking, grows up completely normal, and then during puberty, when hormones are rewriting the body, the X gene activates and grants a specific ability. Cyclops waking up with an uncontrollable optic blast, Iceman's body turning into a living ice for the first time in the locker room. This is the clearest metaphor Marvel has ever built for the terror of realizing you're different from everyone around you at the exact age when your body is starting to change. Second, there are secondary mutations. This is the extra ability that develops later in life, often triggered by trauma, extreme stress, or a massive shift in a mutant's power set. Emma Frost's ability to turn into a living organic diamond, or Beast's physical transformation further and further from human as his own mutation compounds onto itself over the years. The X gene isn't static. For some characters, it keeps rewriting the rulebook for their entire lives. And without getting into specifics in different echelons of mutations, you have some mutations that are called like feral mutations, where the ability presents itself alongside the physical animalistic transformation. Wolfsbane's full wolf shift or Wolverine's own heightened senses and claws fall into this category. The power and the appearance are tangled together from the start. Fourth, there's the Omega level classification, which isn't technically a mutation, but it acts as a ranking of raw power. An Omega level mutant is someone who has the potential to theoretically be limitless within their power set. Jean Grey as the Phoenix host, Franklin Richard, Iceman, these are mutants who can, in the wrong circumstances, reshape reality itself. So who's not a mutant? Marvel loves to blur those lines on purpose. The Hulk is not a mutant. He is a product of gamma radiation exposure. Spider-Man isn't a mutant. He was bitten by a radioactive spider. Deadpool isn't technically a mutant either. Yes, his healing factor comes from an experimental program built using Wolverine's own DNA, which makes him closer to something of an artificial copy. These examples are what you call human mutates, superhumans who are not born with powers but rather genetically engineered. As such, you have other branches of superpowered beings such as the Inhumans, who are not mutants at all. Their powers come from a completely separate genetic process called teragenesis, engineered by the Kree rather than the Celestials, which is exactly why the X gene and the Terrigen Mist have such a complicated, sometimes outright toxic relationship in the comics, since Terrigen exposure can be lethal to mutants. To say that Marvel didn't have to build this elaborate cosmic backstory would be an understatement. They could have kept the vague nuclear radiation explanation forever and nobody would have complained, but by tying mutants to the Celestials, an ancient experiment performed on humanity without consent, Marvel inadvertently gave us a perfect metaphor for how prejudice actually works in the real world. You know, with the idea that mutants didn't choose to be different, the difference was placed in them before they were even born, which takes away their autonomy as humans, and the society around them punishes them for existing exactly how they were made, which is the entire thesis of X-Men distilled into one single piece of cosmic lore. That's why over the 60 years of publication and sliding timescales and more retcons than anyone could possibly track, the X gene still acts as storytelling. It never really was about radiation or the Celestials or ancient tribes. It's just more of a terrifying, like, universal experience of waking up one day and realizing that people are going to fear you over the powers that you have that you had no control of choosing, or was not something that happened by design. But thank you for watching. If you like this video, do all the YouTube things like share, subscribe. Let me know in the comments below if you had the X gene, which ability would you want and which ability would you hate to have. And I'm Anderson. Thank you for watching. Until then, bye.